So thank you for coming to listen to the story from a little Vietnamese guy. Well, that night in June of 1977, the rain came down hard, typical for that type of year in communist Vietnam. My mother gathered two younger brothers and me and told us the time had come. We knew exactly what she meant. The past 6 months had been carefully building up to this, and it was now time to execute the escape. In the rain and in the dark, we boys quietly left our house, my mother leaving on her own. We met her a couple blocks away and flagged a pedicab. We rode silently as the rain pelted hard in waves for about an hour until we arrived at a house outside of Saigon, now called Ho Chi Minh City. My mother introduced us to a boy about my age, told us to listen to what he said, and just to follow him. We were to board a bus before daylight to a coastal city called Phan Thiet. From there, we would catch a smaller bus to a fishing village of Mui Ne before dark. We then were to blend in, keep a low profile until complete darkness, and then follow the boy to the beach and meet the rest of the party, which included her, my youngest sister, our dad, and 14 other people. We would then sneak on a boat and slip undetected into the South China Sea and to freedom. I was 13 years old. Just a few years before, after we had received his doctorate from the University of Florida and then returned to his family in his homeland, my father was the president of the University of Da Nang and was a well-known martial arts grandmaster in Vietnam. After South Vietnam lost the war in 1975, my family lost everything. Under the cover of darkness, we had hidden the back of a transport truck and made our way to Saigon, where we knew more people and would be safer. My parents had managed to lease a small one-bedroom apartment built on stilts above a parking garage in a crowded neighborhood of the city. Life was hard. Food and supplies were scarce and rationed. Every neighborhood was tightly monitored. Because of my father's background, his being educated in the US, we were even more closely watched. I don't remember exactly for how long, but it seemed like he would spend weeks at a time in some sort of labor camp as he was being re-educated or indoctrinated with communist propaganda. He would come home exhausted, covered with mud from head to toe. Numerous strangers had shown up at the apartment pretending to be our friends. There were many discussions in hushed tones. My siblings and I would hide as our parents listened to the BBC News or Voice of America on shortwave radio. My parents told us to be quiet because the man who slept on the cot below our unit was probably an informant. We all could have been arrested and sent away at any moment. After a previous escape had fallen through, we knew that this was our final chance. So under the cover of darkness, we slipped out of Saigon and huddled in the boys' house listening to our mother. The curtains were pulled tight as our mother kissed each one of us goodbye, opened the door, and ducked back out into the rain. In the early morning, we followed my mother's instructions and made our way to Mui Ne with our young guide. We stayed out of sight along the way and hid in the cemetery on the outskirts of the village when we arrived until dark. The boy then led us to the beach. It was pitch black, except for the light from the lanterns in the village and the bobbing lights of the small fishing boats anchored in the distance. As we approached the beach, the sound from the surf got louder and louder, and we saw silhouettes of people against the backdrop of the lanterns on the fishing boats. We gathered with them as a group and made our way through the water toward one of the fishing boats about 100 feet away. In the darkness and in the water, we found my parents and sister. My brothers and sister were put on this odd round woven basket. However, since I was the big brother, I was told to just hang on the outside of this basket and float along until we got to the boat. We had to be silent. An agent had been assigned to each fishing crew to prevent fishermen from helping others escape or escaping themselves. My father was to silently board the boat from the back and incapacitate the sleeping agent while the rest of us waited. But as he made his way from the stern to the bow, some of our group started to lose patience and loudly boarded the boat. Suddenly, I heard a scream followed by a loud splash. The agent then jumped into the water. "Help, help! They're stealing the boat!" Panic ensued. My father yelled for the gun. He admitted later that he did this so that the agent would stop screaming. It worked. Events moved quickly from that point. A couple of men stayed in the back helping pull the women and children up on the boat amidst the panic and confusion. No one had noticed that I was still hanging onto the basket, waiting to be lifted up onto the boat. Before I knew it, I began to float away. Quietly and calmly, I kicked to maneuver closer to the boat. It was now pitch black. Fumbling my way for something to hold on to, I finally found an anchor rope and started to climb. The rope became limp and I slipped back into the water. For some reason, I was sinking despite trying desperately to resurface. Just when I started to feel hopelessness, this hand of God appeared out of nowhere, grabbing a hold of my wrist firmly and pulled me into the boat. My mother had saved my life. After what seemed like forever, the engine finally roared to life and we lurched into the darkness, bringing our hope and fear with it. I fell asleep as the boat puttered into the night. When morning broke, reality set in. We were on the South China Sea in a leaky old wooden 30-foot fishing vessel designed for coastal fishing. During the chaotic moment, we had lost over half of our gasoline and only had enough to reach the sea lanes. After that, we would be drifting. We had no radio, only enough food for a couple of days. And worse yet, we had lost the water containers in the night. The only water supply left was in the bottom third of a rusty barrel. Luckily, the sea was calm on this first morning on the open ocean. The boat had a wooden pole in the middle of the bow as the main sail. A couple of men painted SOS, no food, no fuel, with black engine oil on both sides of the sail. We were all thinking that this was not going to be such a bad experience, nothing like the stories we had heard about the other refugees. Soon enough, a merchant ship would spot us, come and pick us up, and take us to America. By mid-morning, a small dark object appeared on the horizon, heading directly toward us. It kept getting bigger and bigger. It was a ship, just like what we had heard on the radio back home. They saw us, and they were going to save us. We were jumping up and down for joy. The ship's name was also familiar to us, Toyota. It was now so close that we could see the faces of the sailors and their fishing poles. But the ship did not slow down. It kept sailing right by the bow of our boat, its wake rocking and pushing our boat away. We were shocked and in total disbelief. It was not supposed to be this way. Unfortunately, that was only the first one of many we saw throughout the day. As darkness fell, we were faced with the realization that we may not be saved after all. One unexpected part about being on the little boat without light in the vast ocean on a cloudy night is how dark it is. I could not see my own hand even when it was only a few inches from my face. Not being able to sleep, I decided to keep my dad company while he was on steering duties and fumble my way from the bow toward the back. I snuggled up to him. The only thing that I could see was the glow of the small compass hanging on his neck. As we were making small talk, it seemed like the horizon became even unimaginably darker. Instinctively, my dad quickly steered the boat sharply to the left, just in time to avoid the huge tanker careening right where we were. The first half of the day 2 was pretty much the same as day 1. We'd waste precious fuel chasing every cargo ship on the horizon, hoping that they would stop and pick us up to no avail. Depression set in for many in our party. Some people started to cry. When the weather took turn for the worse, the wind picked up, the sky turned dark gray, and the sea boiled with anger. Fish with wings skimmed the waves as if trying to escape the angry sea. Our boat was now creaking and groaning with every wave. The men were desperately bailing water. The captain was straining to keep the boat from capsizing from the cresting waves. The boat climbing up each wave to come crashing down on its trough on the backside and then straining again to climb back up another was like a boxer past his time fighting against a much younger and faster opponent. You could hear his body scream and moan while absorbing every blow. Our afternoon went on and on like that until total darkness set in. Thankfully, darkness chased all that nasty weather away. On the third day, the sea was much calmer. However, we were now very low on fuel, hungry, and thirsty. The sun beat down on us. I finally stumbled to the back with an old tin cup and took a scoop of water from the bottom of the rusty barrel. The water inside of my cup was red with rust particles. My thirst overcame my fear, and I sipped the water using my teeth as a strainer. Like the 2 days before, we saw many ships in the distance, but none seemed to see us or had chosen to ignore us. That night, we heard eerie sounds coming from all directions from the sea that sounded like people crying. Many Vietnamese are superstitious. People on the boat believe that the cry came from the souls of those who died in the previous attempts. Hope floated away on that dark sea. On the fourth day, a large school of sharks followed our boat. Then out of nowhere, we noticed a red ball floating in the water. Then we saw another and another. It was rather strange but welcoming. The balls represent a human connection that we were so desperate for on the lonely, vast ocean. That afternoon, a large white Chinese fishing boat with this bobble motion approached us. They gave us food and water and agreed to tow us to safety. For the first time in 3 days, we felt a sense of hope, almost elation. Then darkness came again. The tow rope went slack, and the Chinese boat turned off all the lights as it pulled away and eventually disappeared. I can't describe the feeling of being abandoned by other humans. I had seen war and its ugliness, but this was different. In war, there were enemies, and enemies were supposed to kill one another. We were not these people's enemies. We were desperate people trying to live, yet people chose to let us die. This is still very hard to comprehend. The fifth day, we woke up to a beautiful sunrise, but no one cared. Everyone was just quiet and deep in his or her own thought. The feeling of deep desperation was on everyone's face. Most knew we weren't supposed to give up, but many felt we just couldn't hold on anymore. Then someone yelled, "Hey, there's another ship!" I casually looked up and watched it pass on by like all the other ships. After it passed us, it suddenly seemed to grow larger and larger until I realized that it was backing up toward us. I felt whatever tiny spark of hope I had left catch fire and rage through my veins. We were going to be saved. Everyone on the boat was jumping up and down, cheering and screaming. My dad climbed on the ship and somehow changed their mind from just giving us food and water to letting us board the ship and saving us. The ship's crew dropped their cargo net down to our boat for us to climb up to the ship. It was a very dangerous 30-plus foot climb as waves slammed the boat against the side. I was under my sister to make sure that she didn't fall. My mother and brothers were on the side next to me, so we're climbing up. With all of us finally safe on the ship, I took my first gulp of clean water in 5 days and watched the crew lift our boat from the sea with a crane and place it right on the deck. And that's when I realized how small and fragile the boat and our lives were. I had no way of knowing the challenges that lay ahead, like having to endure life in the refugee camp or starting a new life in a new country without speaking one word of English. Yet, on that beautiful day on the ship in the South China Sea, as I watched my father look triumphantly in the direction we were going, what I did know was the incredible risk my parents had taken to save us and how love had driven that. And that was all I needed to know. Thank you.